What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another Reddit video here on the Life Stories channel. My name's Dylan, and today we're going to be looking at some stories from the subreddit Tales from the Customer. So sit back, relax and enjoy the show. You're not disabled, you can walk, so give me your seat. Some backstory. I, 18 female, am disabled and have autism, so I'm pretty high functioning and most people can't tell. But that doesn't really matter. I also have Ehlers-Danlos, which causes my joints to dislocate very easily. And I have fibromyalgia, which causes me to be bedridden sometimes due to pain. About 5 years ago, my hips got dislocated in an accident, and since then, my hips have caused great amounts of pain and will sometimes dislocate slightly whilst doing simple things such as walking or getting up from sitting/lying down. I'm constantly in pain, even on good days. Bad days I'm bedridden, on normal days I use a wheelchair to get around. I got discharged from the hospital whilst I was in there for some minor reasons, but it was still really stressful. My roommate is being super nice and decides to take my son and I out to eat in the big city, even though I never go out to eat and the bigger city is an hour or so away. He picked somewhere nice, about $100 max for all three of us. My son is a toddler, 3 years old, but he's a very quiet, shy and well-behaved kid. But he might have autism, so his social skills are not great. I thought today was a good day, so I left my wheelchair at home. Big mistake. We went shopping a little beforehand, and by the time we got to the restaurant, that has only been open for about 30 minutes and is dealing with the lunch rush already, I'm in a lot of pain. I thought I'd be okay without a wheelchair, but I wasn't after walking around stores for an hour whilst we waited for the restaurant to open. My roommate felt bad since he dragged me out, so whilst we were waiting for a table, I was sitting in the only available seat whilst he stood and held my son. An elderly lady comes in and demands the seat. I tell her I'm disabled. She tries to argue with me that I can obviously walk and I'm being disrespectful to my elders. She's causing this huge scene and I want to die inside. I'm in pain and this lady is making everything worse. Someone else got up to let her sit down, but she was giving me evil eyes and making little scoffing noises, especially when my son called me mama. She was probably judging me since he's a toddler and I'm obviously very young. It got worse when we finally got a table. I stood up and she was basically like, "See, you can walk," even though I was bloomin' limping in pain, like it was so obvious I wasn't physically okay. I asked her politely to leave me alone, and she comes up to me and shoves me gently. But because I'm in pain and can barely walk, I fell over. And that's when I felt my shoulder dislocate. My roommate, having done this before, set my shoulder, but the restaurant manager had to kick her out for being violent to another customer, and then they eventually had to call the cops. I could hear the start of the conversation between the manager and the elder lady, as the server awkwardly tries to sit us at a booth. At first she pulled the "I'm an elderly lady and I can't hurt anyone," and after that I couldn't hear her, until she started screaming at the restaurant manager. Everyone inside was giving each other awkward looks because we could all hear her. She was yelling about how I'm a liar and a insert racist slur about Mexican people, and a bunch of other things, and I wanted to cry so bad that I was shaking. The police eventually got her to leave about 15 minutes after she started screaming. I can imagine the police heard her insufferable screeches when the restaurant manager called them. I tried to refuse, but our meal was given to us at a huge discount since they could see that I obviously wanted to leave. They were horrified by my shoulder dislocating and they kept asking if I wanted them to call for an ambulance. I told them it was fine. It happens all the time. They offered free desserts and drinks, which they let me refuse. I just wanted my food and to not have to deal with that lady again. My son was upset by the yelling and me getting injured, but he seems okay. I don't think he entirely understood what was happening, just that the lady was being mean to his mother. The server was really nice to him and reassured him, even asking if it was okay to touch him. My son said yes, and the server ruffled his hair, which my son found very amusing. She was incredible and checked on us often, helped us all calm down with some light-hearted conversation. She made me feel a lot better after all of that, so we gave her a 40% tip, since our food was already being discounted and she fully deserved it. The restaurant manager and server handled it perfectly, but I cannot believe the audacity of that woman. I, unfortunately, still had a breakdown on the way home, and now I'm home and a little calmer, I'm posting here. And remember guys, you've just got to remember, not all disabilities are visible. It's really simple, but it'll help a lot of people going through life. The manager is apparently always right in this restaurant. I'd like to preface this by saying that I work in the food service industry. I've served in 3 different restaurants and hosted in another. I get how this is supposed to work, and this ain't it. Tonight my parents and my uncle and I were going to a concert, and we wanted to go get a nice dinner before spending some time together, and also to celebrate the new job I was just offered in the field I want to work in. I was super excited and ordered a relatively expensive steak cooked medium rare, which is one of my favourite meals. Everyone's food comes out and I cut into my steak to find it cooked medium, almost medium well, and I'm very disappointed. I mentioned it to the server, who immediately offered to have a new one cooked and was very nice about it. I really appreciated it, especially knowing that it was exactly how I would have handled it. However, a few minutes later she comes back to the table and informs me that they're remaking the dish for me despite the fact that they think it was perfectly cooked. This throws me off because 1, it was clearly not, and 2, what an odd thing to say to your guest. I assumed that someone in the kitchen told her to relay the message, but was a bit surprised that she did. When the food was brought back out, a guy who looked like the manager brought it over, but didn't say a word and dropped it at the table. I tucked into it, and it might as well have been mooing, it was so rare. At this point, I was becoming very anxious because I really don't like inconveniencing anyone, but I would also really like the steak cooked correctly. My parents asked the waitress to get the manager to come back over. My mum points out the steak and shows how it's clearly undercooked. Now, in every single restaurant I've worked in, this would be the moment the manager apologises and fixes the problem. Not so much in this case. He looks at my mum and says, paraphrasing a bit, but I swear these were the points he made and the tone, "Well, guess you shouldn't have sent the first one back since it was cooked perfectly. I've been cooking for 40 years, so I should know how steaks are supposed to be cooked. I would never actually say you're wrong, but that steak was cooked correctly." And goes on like this for a bit. My parents are getting upset because, well, who wouldn't be surprised to have someone speak to you in such a condescending way? By now I'm starting to tear up with embarrassment. I just really wanted my dinner. I was hungry and felt awful for the waitress that was so appalled by the way the manager was speaking to us. My parents and I kept apologising to the waitress and assuring her that none of this was her fault, but she has to deal with that dickhead manager every day, and that in itself sucks. He grabbed the plate, and when it came back it was finally cooked correctly, but the whole dinner was ruined. I was so anxious and upset, plus everyone else had finished eating and I was finally just starting. At the same time though, it made me much more grateful for my current manager and how I knew she'd handle these situations. I even texted her to tell her so. What an awful dinner experience on what was supposed to be such a fun night. On the bright side, the concert was awesome and we made the best of everything. To be perfectly honest, when it gets to the point that management thinks that the customer's just trying to get free food every time they complain, the manager should no longer be a manager. All is when your boss is a Karen. So this happened a couple of years ago. My boyfriend and I decided to treat ourselves for our anniversary at our favourite restaurant. It's this really nice and cosy Italian trattoria, which uses a load of local grown organic produce and meats for their pizza and pasta dishes, paired with these really good Italian wines. And it's located in a German town, being famous for a guy who got rid of rat plague, and then kidnaps all but one child for not getting paid. Anyway, amazingly tasty and affordable food. Because of that, we've been there quite a few times and always enjoyed the food and wine options. So when we get there, we're immediately seated, which is odd since we didn't book a table in advance, and there was usually some waiting time. We were quite happy and ready to order drinks and appetizers, and my boyfriend ordered half a litre of beer and I went for the red house wine 0.4 litres and opted to share the antipasti plate as an entree. The waiter seemed to be a new hire, just shy of 20 years old, but he was trying really hard. He accidentally poured the beer into a glass used for waste beer, but not lager. The owner actually screamed at him from the kitchen how dumb and incompetent that he is, and she'd let him go immediately if she wouldn't need him so desperately. Wow lady, calm down. He's trying and he's nervous and you're totally unfair. We smile reassuringly at him when he brings the drinks to our table. I notice he's poured the entire 0.4 litres of wine into my glass instead of using a carafe. I say this to him in a nice way, pointing out that it's really difficult to drink from the glass if it's almost filled to the brim. He answered that this was the first helpful tip he'd received since he started his shift. Dear Lord, poor guy. He actually brings out a filled carafe and says that the antipasti should be ready soon and if we wanted to order the main dishes now. This is fine with us. My boyfriend goes for the salami pizza and I order a medium rare steak with baked potatoes, some vegetables and hollandaise sauce. Shortly after he brings out the antipasti, which was good as always. We then begin the wait for the main dishes. We waited and waited and waited. There were like 15 people max in the restaurant, with the majority already eating dessert, so we were kind of annoyed it took so long. Finally the waiter brings out our food, and it hurt looking at it. What used to be a thin and crispy pizza with really good salami sausage was a sad and soggy excuse for a pancake topped with the cheapest salami imaginable. The steak looked slightly better, but the potatoes and vegetables were a mushy mess sprinkled with store-bought sauce. The steak was well done, and eating it felt like it died more than once. We didn't say anything because we were sitting and waiting almost 2 hours and wanted to go to the cinema afterwards. I just mentioned to the waiter that the steak was too done for my liking, but not to worry. He told his boss, which sent her into another screaming fit. We heard her say to offer us some espresso as a compensation, which we accepted. The poor waiter started to make the espresso as he got behind the bar. The witch boss starts screaming again at how he could be so dumb to make coffee whilst we were still eating, and how he could not know that coffee always comes after dinner. By now, all of the guests looked at each other really uncomfortable, and some in a kind of shock/horror. The poor waiter was in such a bad anxiety, he forgot the coffee at all. Again, we didn't mention it because we were just glad to escape from there, but I left him a tip nevertheless because we felt sorry for him. I also wrote on a napkin that he could find a better job than this and that we'd quit on the spot. We haven't been back since. To this day, I still feel annoyed that I didn't have the courage to call out his boss on her behaviour, but she's been struggling ever since to hire new people, and now is the only chef because she had to sell the restaurant to someone else. Word tends to travel in small cities. Too bad it wasn't a sandwich shop, or I could call her Sandwich. And there we go folks, another example of a really bad manager. Way to ruin a good restaurant, Karen. Lady came into fast food restaurant joint with food from another fast food place. Earlier this evening, I took my kids to dinner at a fast food place. Once we started eating, a woman came in with 2 small kids in tow and an older woman I assume was the kids' grandma. I referred to this woman as W and GM for grandma. Well, W walked in with a bag of food from a well-known sandwich shop here in the US. It was hard not to notice W, as since the moment she walked in the door, she was yelling at her kids. W and her family immediately went to a booth, popped down for her sandwich and started eating. The booth she sat in was aligned with ours, so I was facing her and it was impossible not to notice this. For context, I've been a server for many years, now a stay-at-home mum, but what makes a good server is being a good observer. Even after years out of the industry, it's hard not to observe people in a restaurant-type environment. The cashier, who was on the till, stared at the family with an odd expression. I swear to you, the woman had bought chips from home that were in a sandwich bag. I wouldn't have noticed this, except she kept getting onto her toddler daughter because the little girl wanted to feed woman with chips. Now I know it sounds silly, but the whole thing felt surreal. The entire time the woman loudly fussed at her kids over and over. They had no food for themselves. 2 sippy cups sat on the table and the grandmother didn't have any food either. Don't get me wrong, when I was a server there were plenty of times that customers would bring in food outside. Most of the time they were with a group and were dieting or had severe food allergies, so they couldn't risk ordering off the menu. These types of circumstances have never made me think twice. But I could never have the guts to waltz into a place and bring outside food and not one member of my table order anything. It seemed tacky, not just the whole outside food thing, but letting the entire place know how awful her parenting was. As a parent, I know we all have bad days where we fall short of our own expectations of ourselves, so I'm doing my best not to judge her. But dang, it did suck to watch. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you did enjoy, please leave a like rating down below. We've been thinking that we're going to start taking some stories from the Discord server that we run here on Life Stories, but also the Storytime channel as well. So if this sounds interesting, click on the link in the description down below, join our Discord, and go to the Submit Stories channel and send us over your story. Hey, who knows, it might be featured in a video. Thank you and goodbye.